May 22, 1969, 0800 hours, Saigon. A classified casualty report lands on the desk of General Creighton Abrams. It concerns a MACV-SOG reconnaissance unit, designated Recon Team Copperhead, operating illegally across the border in the Parrot's Beak region of Cambodia. The official statement sent to the families was standard, tragic, and vague. Missing in action while engaging a hostile force. According to the Pentagon's narrative, Master Sergeant Miller and his five-man team were ambushed by a battalion-sized element of the North Vietnamese Army, NVA. They were overrun. It was a kinetic, violent end to a dangerous mission. For 50 years, that was the history. But recently declassified tactical logs from the Forward Air Controller, FAC, flying overhead, tell a story that makes no tactical sense. The discrepancy. MACV-SOG operators were the quiet professionals. They were the most lethal men in the jungle. But if they were compromised, their protocol was to unleash hell. They carried CAR-15s, Swedish K submachine guns, and enough claymore mines to level a city block. A firefight involving a SOG team is not quiet. It is a thunderclap. Yet the audio logs from the circling aircraft reveal a disturbing anomaly. Silence. There was no prairie fire emergency call. There was no sound of AK-47 fire. There were no explosions. The radio operator for Team Copperhead didn't scream for extraction. He didn't call in coordinates for an airstrike. The frequency simply went dead. The investigation begins. We are about to open the file on an incident that the U.S. Army tried to bury under 30 tons of napalm. We are going to examine the evidence that suggests Team Copperhead wasn't killed by the enemy. They were taken by something else. Briefing directive. We dig through archives that others ignore. If you value the truth over the official narrative, subscribe to this channel and activate notifications. We need more eyes on this evidence. And for the veterans in the audience, if you operated in the Parrot's Beak or heard the stories about the white signal in '69, write your testimony in the comments below. Your experience is part of this investigation. To understand the impossibility of the event, we must first understand the men who vanished. The unit Recon Team Copperhead belonged to MACV-SOG. Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. In 1969, SOG was a unit that officially did not exist. They operated over the fence, across the borders of Laos and Cambodia, where the United States was technically not at war. These were not drafted infantrymen. They were the quiet professionals, the absolute apex of unconventional warfare. The loadout. The team was led by Master Sergeant Thomas Miller, a three-tour veteran who had spent more time in the jungle than in the United States. His team consisted of 2 other American Green Berets and 4 indigenous commandos, Montagnards. Logistical records indicate they were deployed heavy. They carried modified CAR-15 carbines and cut-off RPD machine guns for maximum close-range firepower. They wore sterile uniforms, no rank, no name tapes, no U.S. markings. If they were caught, their government would disavow them. The mission profile. On May 20th, their objective was surveillance. Intelligence indicated the NVA was running a hardline communications cable through Sector 4. Copperhead's job was to locate the wire, tap it, and remain undetected. This is the critical variable. Stealth was their primary defense. A SOG team moves through the jungle like smoke. They don't break twigs. They don't speak. They communicate with hand signals and subtle clicks. They are the hunters, not the prey. The tactical impossibility. This brings us back to the official report of an ambush. If an NVA patrol had stumbled upon them, the reaction of Team Copperhead would have been instantaneous and violent. The jungle would have erupted. SOG doctrine dictates that in a compromise, you expend all ammunition to break contact. But the forensic analysis of the extraction site, which we will detail later, showed that the safety selectors on their rifles were still engaged. Master Sergeant Thomas Miller didn't fire his weapon. He didn't trigger his claymores. Whatever happened to Team Copperhead didn't come from the bushes. It didn't trigger their trip flares. It bypassed their perimeter entirely. These men were ready for war. They were not ready for what found them.
May 21, 1969, 1400 hours. Recon Team Copperhead had been on the ground for 26 hours. According to standard operating procedure, they were required to establish a comms window with the Forward Air Controller, FAC, flying in a Cessna O2 Skymaster overhead. The FAC's call sign was Covey. At 1400 sharp, the Covey pilot keyed his mic to receive the team's status report. He expected a whisper, a sitrep, a coordinate check. Instead, he recorded the anomaly. The signal declassified flight logs from the 20th Tactical Air Support Squadron describe an immediate violent interference on the FM band. This was not the chaotic static of a lightning storm, nor was it the rhythmic jamming used by Soviet-trained NVA operators. The pilot described it as a white signal. It was a constant, high-amplitude carrier wave, a perfect synthetic hum that drowned out the entire frequency spectrum. It didn't fluctuate. It was mathematical. The pilot attempted to triangulate the source. It wasn't coming from the north. It was emanating directly from Team Copperhead's grid square. The biotic silence. Even more disturbing is the testimony regarding the environment. Vietnam veterans know that the jungle is never quiet. It screams. Cicadas, birds, monkeys. The background noise usually registers around 70 decibels. But in the audio recovered from the FAC's secondary receiver, which managed to punch through the interference for a few seconds, the audio background from the ground was absolute zero. The jungle had gone silent. In biology, this is known as the predator effect. When an apex predator enters an area, the lower ecosystem shuts down to avoid detection. But for an entire sector of rainforest to go instantly mute requires a presence that triggers a primal genetic fear in every living organism simultaneously. Team Copperhead was still transmitting, but they weren't speaking. The radio was just broadcasting the sound of a dead jungle and that impossible humming vibration. May 23, 1969, 0600 hours. 48 hours after the white signal jammed the airwaves, MACV-SOG launched a bright light mission. In the lexicon of the Vietnam War, a bright light team had one job: to recover downed pilots or besieged operators. Usually they were jumping into a firefight. They rappelled from Huey helicopters directly into the coordinates of Team Copperhead's last transmission. They hit the ground with weapons drawn, adrenaline spiking, expecting to find NVA bunkers or a massacre site. They found neither. The crime scene. The team located Copperhead's Remain Overnight site in a dense thicket of bamboo. What they saw defied every instinct of infantry warfare. If a team is overrun, you find shell casings, you find shredded vegetation, you find blood trails. If a team is fleeing, they drop their heavy gear, rucksacks, rations, extra mortar rounds to move faster.
The campsite was perfectly intact. Sea ration cans, specifically beans and franks, were found open and half-eaten, resting on logs. Spoons were still inside the cans. Hammocks were strung up with proper knots. The claymore mines, set up in a defensive perimeter, were still in place. The firing devices, clackers, were still in their safety pouches. The weapons. But the most chilling discovery was the weapons. 6 CAR-15 carbines were not found in the hands of dead men. They were found stacked in a neat military pyramid in the center of the clearing. They were cleaned. The bolts were forward. The safety selectors were on safe. Soldiers do not stack their rifles in a combat zone. They sleep with them. They die with them. To stack weapons is an act of surrender or a ritual. The analysis. The bright light team leader reported over the radio, 0 contact, 0 blood. It looks like they just stood up and walked away. There were no signs of struggle. Whatever interrupted their meal didn't frighten them into firing a shot. It compelled them to leave their only means of defense behind and walk unarmed into the dark. Mission directive. We're halfway through the file, and the evidence is about to shift from military tactics to physical impossibilities. If you want to follow this investigation to the end, hit that subscribe button now. Join the briefing. We uncover what the official reports leave out.
The jungle destroys equipment slowly. Humidity corrodes contacts. Heat degrades chemicals. But what the bright light team found inside the equipment of Team Copperhead was not natural decay. It was instantaneous extraction. The radio anomaly. The RTO's rucksack was recovered leaning against a tree. Inside was the AN-PRC-77 radio. When the recovery sergeant attempted to power it up, it was dead. Assuming a simple failure, he opened the battery compartment to swap out the BA-4386 magnesium battery. This is a heavy, brick-sized power unit. It contains wet chemical cells. But when the sergeant pulled the battery out, it felt hollow. It was light as a feather. He cracked the casing open with his knife. There was no acid. There was no paste. The interior was filled with a dry, gray powder resembling fine ash. Chemicals do not evaporate in 48 hours. They had been transmuted. The time freeze. The team then collected the personal effects left near the hammocks. Among them were 3 wristwatches, 2 Rolex Submariners, and 1 Seiko, standard private purchase gear for SOG operators. Mechanical watches run on kinetic energy, movement. They don't have batteries to drain. Yet all 3 watches had stopped. The recovery report notes the exact time displayed on the dials, 03:17:000, not 03:16, not 03:18. All 3 mechanisms had seized at the exact same second. The physics of the event. This evidence rules out a conventional weapon. An EMP fries circuits, but it doesn't turn battery acid into dust. A chemical weapon kills men, but it doesn't stop mechanical gears. The forensic conclusion suggests that at 3:17 a.m., the campsite was subjected to a zero-point event, a localized field that siphoned every ounce of potential energy, both electrical and kinetic, from the area. The flashlights didn't just go out. The energy inside them was consumed. The watches didn't just break. The momentum was stolen. And if this field could drain a magnesium battery in a nanosecond, what did it do to the bioelectrical systems of 6 human beings? Physical evidence can tell us what happened. But to understand the psychological horror of that night, we need the testimony of the dead. The artifact.
Buried at the bottom of the stacked weapons pile, the recovery team found a standard-issue waterproof field notebook belonging to team leader Master Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was a meticulous soldier. The first 40 pages of the diary are filled with standard tactical data, coordinates, supply counts, patrol routes. The handwriting is small, precise, and controlled. But on the final page, the discipline collapses. The graphology analysis. Forensic handwriting experts who analyzed the notebook in 1970 noted a distinct shift in motor control. The letters become jagged and elongated. The pressure on the pencil was so intense it tore through the paper in 3 places. This wasn't just panic, this was physiological failure. The handwriting matches clinical samples of patients suffering from extreme vestibular disruption, the loss of balance and spatial orientation caused by intense magnetic fields. The final entry. The entry is time-stamped 03:10 a.m., 7 minutes before the watches stopped. It reads, "The jungle has stopped breathing. No birds, no wind, just the hum. It's inside my teeth." Grandel says he sees static in the air, like heat waves, but it's freezing cold. The compass is useless. The needle isn't pointing north, it's pinned down, straight down. The air tastes like copper. We are leaving the guns. They are vibrating. The metal is hurting our hands. And then the final scrawled line, written so heavily the graphite snapped. They are not in the trees. They are under us. The implications. Miller describes a copper taste. In radiology, a metallic taste in the mouth is the primary symptom of acute exposure to massive ionizing radiation. He describes vibrating metal. This confirms the presence of a high-frequency magnetic field strong enough to manipulate steel. Team Copperhead didn't surrender. They were standing on top of a reactor or a weapon that was powering up beneath the jungle floor.
The campsite was just the waiting room. The recovery team found the true site of the incident 50 meters due north in a small natural clearing. The geometric scar. In the middle of the chaotic, overgrown jungle, they found order. A perfect geometric circle, exactly 20 feet in diameter, had been etched into the earth. At first glance, the bright light team thought it was a bomb crater or a napalm strike. But as they approached, the Geiger counters remained silent. There was no charring. There was no ash. The forensic pathology of plants. Napalm burns from the outside in. It leaves black soot. The vegetation inside this circle was not burned. It was flash desiccated. The bamboo stalks had turned bone white. Examination revealed that the water inside the plant cells had boiled instantly, causing the stalks to rupture from the inside out. This requires a sudden exposure to microwave radiation at an intensity that military science in 1969 could not generate on a battlefield. The gravimetric distortion. The recovery team leader noted in his debrief that stepping into the circle felt physically punishing. He described a sensation of wearing 2 rucksacks. Men fell to their knees, vomiting. Their internal equilibrium was haywire. The local gravity within that 20-foot circle was measurably heavier than the surrounding jungle. The vanishing point. But the definitive evidence lies in the mud. The ground inside the circle had been baked into a hard ceramic-like crust, preserving the final moments of Team Copperhead like a photograph. There were 6 sets of boot prints, standard U.S. Army Panama-soled jungle boots. The tracks show the men walked from the camp into the center of the circle. They stood in a tight formation, facing outward, and then the tracks stop. There are no footprints leading out.
There are no drag marks indicating they were taken by tigers or enemies. There is no disturbance in the canopy above to suggest a helicopter extraction. 6 men walked into the center of the anomaly. The white signal peaked, the gravity shifted, and then, instantaneously, they ceased to exist in our dimension.
The U.S. military does not like unanswered questions. When they find something they cannot explain, destroy, or control, the protocol is simple. Bury it. The withdrawal. At 0900 hours on May 23rd, the Bright Light Recovery Team received an urgent encrypted directive from MACV Command. The order was not to continue the search. It was not to recover the equipment. The order was immediate extraction, hot extract, clear the grid square by 1200. They left the weapons stacked in the pyramid. They left the diary. They boarded the choppers and watched the silent jungle fade away beneath them. The erasure. 4 hours later, a flight of 3 B-52 Stratofortresses from Guam arrived over the Parrot's Beak. They initiated Operation Arclight. This was not a precision strike. It was a saturation bombing. 30 tons of high explosives were dropped on Team Copperhead's last known coordinates. The objective wasn't to kill enemy combatants. The NVA wasn't there. The objective was to turn that specific patch of jungle and whatever was buried beneath the burn circle into a crater of churned earth. The final anomaly. The official Pentagon report states that the area was sanitized to prevent sensitive equipment from falling into enemy hands, but a surviving technician from the monitoring station in Thailand later admitted the truth. 10 minutes after the bombs fell, after the Earth had been turned inside out, the listening posts picked up the white signal one last time. It wasn't weaker, it was louder. And then it abruptly cut off, as if a switch had been thrown deep underground. The verdict. We will never know if Team Copperhead found a secret Soviet weapon, a geological anomaly, or something not of this world. We only know that 6 of America's finest warriors walked into a circle in the jungle, and the United States Air Force dropped a mountain of explosives to make sure no one ever followed them. This concludes the investigation into the Mekong white signal, but the archives are full of files the government refuses to acknowledge. If you want to see us open Case File 006 regarding the underground anomaly at the Semipalatin's test site, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Do not let these stories be forgotten. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Look at the evidence, the drained batteries, the stopped watches, the burn circle. Theory A, was this a Soviet test of a scalar weapon? Theory B, or did Team Copperhead stumble upon something non-human? Write your theory below. I read every report. Over and out.